So just to refresh your memory, this is the sort of context of Madrid with all the evictions. Each dot represents not a number, but an actual people and families that have been evicted. And also looking at this was the premise, I guess, of our studio. The starting point was the Welcome Hotel, which is an actual real hotel in the city of Madrid. And what they do is they welcome both tourists and the evicted and other people who have no place to go. So the displaced and people who are tourists come together in this sort of social condenser. So we thought that was a really interesting starting point from which we started looking at the actual evictions, looking at them because we couldn't participate in one, so we were watching all these videos and collating all these films, annotating them. And then we came up with a strategy that was different from the traditional architect, which would result in the construction of new housing for, evicted. If you have, people with no homes, build new homes. But the thought process here was, what's the difference between a house and a home? What makes the condition of the evicted different from someone who just needs a house? And we started studying these situations, which resulted in all these domesticities, which we presented the last presentation. So we started looking at bodies, the ways that activists interacted with the police. We started looking, so these are real snapshots of the videos. You can tell they're highly emotive. You can see the police breaking down the doors and the actual objects becoming an actor as well in this scene. The people become agents, groups of, settings that would never be used for ephemeral homes now become inhabited temporarily. So these are all the iterations that we were looking at. Vessels becoming homes for other objects. Corridor houses, for example, where they would displace their belongings on the corridor while they had to, evacuate the home within an hour. So there's a temporality to these conditions as well as materiality and physicality of people in relationships. So after studying all of these conditions, we started to, quite a few, like the stairs. So not just inside the existing units, but also on the street, what they would actually be doing to look for new homes, such as commercial office floors or on the street. So after that, we started thinking about these systems as a coincidence system, as it's sort of everything's related. Not one eviction is isolated. In fact, we started studying the stats, and an eviction would cause another eviction, where if you're a guarantor for someone else's eviction, or someone else's property, quite often your families or your relatives, you would then somehow also be implicated in the debt, which would then cycle on. So we had sort of a graphic analysis and a visual representation of these potential spaces that were coincident, I guess. And from all these, we started looking then, okay, what's really going on here? There's something more than just the domestic context. Like, what is it? So we started looking at economics and the broader picture. This is the global context, I suppose, of eviction. We start here looking at Blackstone and Goldman Sachs. They're sort of vulture investors from overseas. And here you see them sort of swooping in, adding new housing stock and buying public housing from the government in Spain, in Madrid as well, via those entities. And then you see also an influx of migrants coming into Madrid and Spain, where this patchwork sort of represents them filtering into the new homes, as well as the social housing that is now private housing. Then you see this it's sort of come about as I guess a landscape of eviction, where one navigates this sort of arduous terrain of what actually happens. So from here, I guess low house prices draw people in. So you see bank loans and housing credit as well. And then this sort of generates a high home ownership, which actually is 85% in Spain, which is extremely high. Others, rent and things like that. The rental pool then filters down into home ownership, and then you get domestic tourism like Airbnb, like the other group was talking about. And then the financial crisis. So you start to see this, this fragmentation of what's happening. Aid in that top corner from, economic or policy points of view are coming in to try and help these people who are now jobless, or, you know, see the stats are sort of linking spatially, tying in with the new migrants coming in. And the sort of shrinking job market in addition to the mortgage trap that I was talking about, where an eviction might cause another eviction in your family, and it's sort of this spiraling cycle that, you know, once you get in, it's almost like you can't get out. And that's sort of what this landscape is trying to convey. And then you have this sort of basin that PA, the group we've heard about, speak on during the week. They've come in as these rescue boats, and they're sort of helping, you know, both advice, workshops, rights, and aid, providing an outlet for people who have no outlet. And you see the boat's social services budget driving away as a statistic of the subsidies that are decreasing for these people. And then you come to this sort of mountain, I suppose, of evicted, you know, evicted spaces and homes and people, where we sort of try to visualize what does that mean when 550,000 families are evicted in Spain. Like, what does that look like, you know? And 140 evictions a day in Spain is quite an incredible statistic. So what could architects do to respond to these numbers, you know? Empty housing, 3.4 million in Spain, and then you start seeing this waterfall of, you know, things that actually come out that are quite terrible: depression and suicide because of evictions. And but we also looked at, you know, sort of in the shadow of this mountain, there was this sort of these ephemeral homes that we analysed that were coming out of what was seen as, you know, quite a catastrophe that's not being, responded to, and what potentials could lie. So I guess this is where the architecture stream comes in. You know, you've seen the economic aid, you've seen the policies. If I go back, like at the bottom where the legal aid is coming in, but where does architecture fit in? Where do architects step in and help play their part in this scenario? So this is the sort of forced relocation, I suppose, of citizens that are also now migrants, I guess, in their own country, looking for new homes. You start seeing this ephemeral traveling of objects and their belongings to new places. You see also, I guess, outcomes that arise from that, like protests increased by 60% and things like that. So it's, you know, we've really started to nut out what's happening here and what the relationships are between not just the isolated spaces, but the global financial and urban context. You see here informal markets, sort of like rafts drifting away in the corner, where they actually go stay informally in other places like the commercial refuges or the Welcome Hotel, which we mentioned. And yeah, it's sort of, I guess, a speculative approach to what might architecture hold for evictions. And that's the sort of, you know, big landscape. And then we started thinking, okay, now that we've, you know, spatialized it, what does that look like in the city of Madrid? This is the mountain, as we call it. We've even put it on Idealista, so you can check it out. And, you know, the figures are actually real. So that's 1 out of 162,000 evicted, and the total square area of evicted homes. So that really gives you a sense of how many vacant properties there are because of this crisis, I suppose. And just standing in the city, almost like a Tower of Babel, but in a different manner. You know, it's really it's speaking of the city, but not in the sense of tourism. It's not in the sense of you know, pride. I guess it's a sense of collective shock and almost shame, perhaps, that something like this might happen in your city. So there it is in Babel, I suppose, the Welcome Hotel. And we then started making this model, and then it really got to a, you know, it's really architectural, but yet, so it just got more and more complex, I guess, as we did it and started to find new spaces between them. So you can start to see it's like a sort of a high rise of evicted properties, but in a new way. And we've sort of overlaid infographics on it, so it started to read multiple layers, and then you see this complexity of richness. And this is probably, you know, a good image encapsulating what someone feels in an eviction, I guess, except, you know, you kind of feel isolated, but you realize that everyone's connected and everyone's almost going through or understanding the same thing. So that's the model, and I hope you've learned a bit more about evictions, and that yeah, that it's sparked your imagination for future architecture proposals. Thank you.